On this episode of Transforming Cities, I host our first ever live roundtable on the renter journey. With guests Michael DiMella, Autumn Hunt, and Steven Rea, we dig into topics around AI, attribution, budget diversification, and more. And we are live.
What's up? How's it going?
Hello, hello. We'll give everyone a few minutes to join. If you are joining us from LinkedIn, go ahead and put in the chat where you're joining from.
Where are you joining from, Tori?
I'm joining from the beautiful, stunning, gorgeous Augusta, Georgia. Where are you joining from,
Very nice.
Mike?
I am in lovely downtown Boston, where it's a balmy. Actually, it's pretty warm today. It's like 30 degrees. It just snowed a little bit last night, though. But it's nice today, actually.
What about you, Autumn?
Yeah, we were just talking about this a few minutes ago. I'm based out of Lincoln, Nebraska. So end of January, it's historically supposed to be frigid, but it's 60 degrees here today. So that's fantastic.
Oh, wow.
And Steven?
The greatest city in the country, Austin, Texas. Front row seat to watch a city go from small city to what I think is going to be kind of the hub of the 21st century economy.
Don't mess with Texas.
Zero to
I'm
60 from
third generation native, which kind of makes me like a rainbow colored unicorn around here. If three of us get in the same room, you have to be careful. There might be lightning strikes or all sorts of weird things.
my 5-year-old daughter would love to take you home if you're a rainbow colored unicorn. I can tell you that much.
Let's see. We've got Eric Briggs in the chat joining us from Chicago, Judith from Atlanta, Shelly from Minnesota, Mike Brewer from Las Vegas. Are you at, is that convention going on this week happening in Vegas? Yeah. Are you at the convention? Janet from Minneapolis, Chris Arnold from Colorado. We know him. And then Gret from Knoxville, Tennessee. Am I saying your name right? If not, Tyler Yates from Chicago. Wow. This is like a Lisa reunion. I used to work with Eric and Tyler. Angie DeWitt in Chicago. Chicago represent. Well, we are 3 minutes in and we have about a 30-minute roundtable discussion with a live Q&A. 30 hours would be some kind of Guinness World Record, which we are not trying to set today. So let me go ahead and introduce the panel. But first, we are Transforming Cities. I know I'm hosting this from my personal LinkedIn today, but I am the growth content manager at Transforming Cities. We power research-backed insights, go-to-market guidance, development news, events on transformingcities.io. We do twice weekly insights, weekly episodes, interviews, and most recently the Developer's Driveway, which is our joint media platform between Authentic and Charles Gate. So if you are not already, go ahead and give us a like, follow, and subscribe. And now let me just introduce our panel. So, normally at Transforming Cities, we're doing debates, but today we're roundtabling, which is so exciting. And you may notice Chris is not on the call this time. This is our first event without Chris Arnold, the Transforming Cities founder. So we'd like to kick things off and just introduce today's panelists. So first we have Steven Rea. Steven brings nearly 20 years of experience in multifamily property management with a focus on empowering site teams and developing tailored strategies to help property owners maximize their investments. Throughout his career, Steven has championed practical solutions to industry challenges, blending operational insight with commitment to innovation. This perspective led him to found Chasing Tomorrow and launch Guided, a platform that simplifies the creation of interactive training and operational content. By streamlining complex processes, Guided helps team work smarter and owners realize greater value of their assets. Welcome, Steven.
Thank you, Tori.
Next, we have Autumn Hunt. Autumn is a market journey thought leader, as well as the vice president of marketing and strategy at Resi. She heads in marketing and sits at the intersection of go-to-market, growth, and organizational strategy, product, and impact value for multifamily marketing companies and property management companies. Hello, Autumn.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And then next we have me. Hi, I'm Tori. I'm a growth content manager and former multifamily marketer. Right now, I am the growth content manager at Transforming Cities, Charles Gate, and Authentic. And with that, I am passionate about quantifying as much of the renter journey as possible. I think there's a lot of hairy areas that can get really confusing where owners, investors start to lose money. And I've always been passionate about digging into that process with data-backed marketing decisions. Next, we have Mike DiMella. Mike is a nationally recognized leader and in the real estate industry has been awarded one of Boston's top 40 under 40 professionals by the Boston Business Journal. He's also managing partner at Charlesgate, helping investors develop go-to-market and operate multifamily to generate market-beating returns. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Tori, Steven, and Autumn. Looking forward to this.
And then there's Chris. Chris isn't on with us today, so he doesn't get an intro. But he's in the comments hyping us up. So let's dig in. Question 1 for the panel. Let's dive into the renter journey and the debate around attribution. Is it still useful? Should we rely on single source, multi-touch, first click, last click, none at all? What are your thoughts?
I guess I'll jump in first and try my best not to go rogue on the first question. But I'm a big believer that because it's so imperfect right now, we don't really have great data. That while it's important, you have to take a little bit of a different type of scientific approach. This isn't something where we can go one-to-one. People typically interact with our properties in a lot of places. They see it in a lot of places. So having direct attribution feels almost impossible. So I'm a bigger believer in know what you're doing in the aggregate. And then if you're going to change something, change one thing, look at the impact. It's kind of a scientific approach where you have a control and then you have a variable, you change that variable, you see if it helps. If it doesn't help, you put back what you took away or you add something new. But it has to be an iterative approach. It can't be static. Too much marketing right now in multifamily feels set it and forget it. And that approach just doesn't work. And this isn't an easy bake oven. This doesn't work in our industry. So yeah, that's kind of my take on attribution is you could spend a lot of time trying to make it perfect, but that's impossible because we have imperfect data.
Yeah, we have imperfect data and our attribution models are imperfect itself. So there's the limitations of data, the limitations of tool, the limitations of the human element in the mix of that. And so taking a scientific approach to that is nearly impossible. To going with an iterative approach, but you have to have a group of marketers behind the scenes who knows how to balance all of the measurement and the art of marketing too. Because while we may have really great intentions to move one piece of the puzzle at a time or moving a lever up and down, there's so many other variables changing at any given time that it may muddy the waters to be able to see, did that moving that lever up in PPC spend actually help with lead gen or conversion when there's some other things that are going on. Maybe at that same time and maybe it's something like marketing can't influence where they just launch a new concession or there's 10 new units on the market. All of those variables really muddy the water. So being someone behind the scenes who has experience within that and has good modeling and a good team to collectively discuss what those results look like is a good approach as well.
Yeah, I think you guys both raised some good points. But for me, I think about, what's the question? So is it worth it? Why should we do attribution? Is attribution work? Is it important? I think maybe yes, it can be but the question is, what is it good for? And if we're going to say, okay, we're trying to invest marketing dollars in the right space, the right places, the right tactics, and we want to track that to see what's working most effectively. Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. There are some limitations as we discussed, as Steven and Autumn, you guys just mentioned. But I think the big thing for me and where there's a big disconnect is that it's not often done all the way through to an actual signing of a lease. It's maybe where do the leads come from, or how much is the cost per click over here, and how many leads does that drive? But really, there is far too often the disconnect between leasing and marketing on the ground. So that even if you have that kind of attribution, it's lost in the mix of actually trying to drive revenue and drive actual leases. And so I think fundamentally attribution it's something that we should be getting more accurate with and trying to get data around. But it really only makes sense in the context of if you can actually track it all the way to the closed loop of an actual signed lease.
Yeah, you make a great point. There's a lot of metrics that under any given umbrella or lever or point in the journey, which helps contribute to understanding like what's working and what's not working at any given point. But you bring up a really good point of like, who is this for and what does it mean? And I remember when investors, owners, and developers would come to marketing and say, prove the value of marketing, and having to do that on paper within the limitations that we have while you are explaining some pretty significant marketing data to non-marketers is very difficult as well. So being able to construct a narrative about what your data is telling you, and then also being prescriptive about it, and hopefully you have enough budget to be more prescriptive about it with the goals that you have ahead of you if it's a new lease up or a stabilized asset.
Well, and I'll just add one last thing there. It's as an industry, we had this digital transformation circa 2012, 2013, kind of the rise of the ILS. Social came a couple years later, AdWords. And I think, Chris, you had said in our prep call, I'm sorry, not Chris, Mike, you had said in our prep call, so I get for looking at notes while I'm talking. I just see names and say them. But I remember building marketing teams, in some of the companies I've been at, and it was like, oh, you have a Facebook page that you know how to use, or you have an Instagram account where you've generated a bunch of followers, and we don't have that many true marketers in the industry and who really approach things from a legitimate marketing standpoint, who could push back on owner and say, not everything is a one-to-one direct line that you can show with math. Like, some of this stuff is long tail. And I think that's, especially in some larger companies, a shift that we're going to continue to see is some real marketers start to get kind of in the business and think about things from a both a near-term and long-term perspective, as opposed to just the panic marketing that we tend to do in the industry right now when we're scrambling for leases.
We could probably talk about that topic for quite a bit more. Steven, you bring up such a good point. I think especially I've been in this seat and I've seen a lot of marketers in this seat where their marketing team is far too lean, whether it's a marketer of one or a really small team. And we all know like the technical capabilities that need to exist and the technical nuance that need to exist under the marketing umbrella today to make it even remotely effective at all. And so when you have such a lean team, like, you just don't have time to be a marketer. Oftentimes you are a marketer who is effectively a project or a product manager, or you're managing all of your outsourced activities, which that can be very difficult to manage. And you just don't have time to be that scientific, methodical, digital, technical marketer at the end of the day. So there's a huge opportunity for people to continue to invest in marketing. And one of the things, the best ways you can do that is invest in your marketing team as well.
Yeah, I think those are both great points, because I think we're talking, as we talk about this conversation about attribution and what works, and I think there's some other questions coming up about marketing efficiency, but yeah, the expertise of marketing, and especially in today's world where there's so many more ways to do quote unquote marketing, that it's very difficult to establish and build and have that expertise fully in-house within the context of lean teams or sort of lean project pro formas. But I think one of the habits that I talk to investors, developers all the time to try to move away from is this idea of just reducing costs across the board as much as possible is going to lead to better outcomes, when you might want to invest a little bit more to drive a positive outcome, right? We're not talking about value engineering a window from grade A to grade B. That doesn't make a difference perhaps to the audience, but we're talking about investing in your revenue team, marketing and leasing, that will actually drive real tangible outcomes and outperform the market, outperform your pro forma targets by investing a little bit of extra in that type of expertise needed to deliver the proper outcomes.
Absolutely. These are all great points. And I love seeing how active the chat is already. So again, Q&A live at the end. If you guys have questions while you're hearing this discussion, drop them in the chat and we will answer them for you. So let's move on to the next question. We just talked at length about attribution and how imperfect it can be. So, when we talk about the efficacy of very traditional boots on the ground tools like on-site signage, how effective are those traditional marketing methods considering the challenge of digital reporting and attribution that we just addressed? And how can marketers and site teams alike quantify that attention and these boots on the ground activations in a meaningful way for moving results?
So for me, this is the most important. And it's the thing that is also probably neglected the most by a lot of properties and a lot of property managers and marketers. We've gotten away from, well, let me back up a second. We didn't have a need for this for most of the 2010s. About 2012 through 2022, If you opened your doors, you had people coming in, and occupancies were good, and as long as you weren't terrible at your job, the properties typically performed well. That's not how things are working today. I am a massive fan. So when I started in the industry, I started on site, and when I didn't have traffic, my boss would tell me, "Well, what are you doing to get it?" Right? And I didn't have ILSs, I didn't have anything like that. So I went and built relationships with the restaurants down the street, or you know, employer like veterinarian offices or dentists or places where there were residents that or prospective residents that I wanted to live at my property who I felt could pay rent. And yes, does that take time? Absolutely. But the people that you get from it are typically of higher quality. You have a little bit better confidence in what they can do. And it's not as simple as let's make some flyers, let's buy some cookies, and let's drop them off at the front desk, because the flyers go in the trash, the cookies get eaten, and nobody knows where they came from. I had in our prep, I had this kind of quick story that I talked about where we had a property in Austin at my last management company. It was roughly 2.5 miles from Tesla. The property manager was someone who I mentored, and we were trying to get into Tesla. We couldn't figure it out. And I said, just keep trying. Something will hit. And she sent certified letters and food and showed up. And eventually, after about 3-4 months, the person called back and said, "What can I do for you? Why won't you leave me alone?" And she told her and said, "I just want to be on your relocation list. We're really close. We're a brand new property. It's beautiful. We already have 20 of your residents who live here, or 20 of your employees who live here." She said, "Great. Now that property, last I checked, granted it's been like a year, but had about 30-40% of its residents were coming from Tesla or Tesla adjacent." And that is absolutely a byproduct of just stick-to-itiveness. And I think outreach marketing isn't something that's really actually done well. People go around and they drop off flyers, but they're not actually talking to people and building relationships. They're not going to the restaurant and going to the pre-open where the whole staff is there and talking to them about things. And it's all relationships, and it's extraordinarily effective when you do it. Same thing with signage, same thing with everything else.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Transforming Cities, brought to you by Authentic, delivering premier multifamily brand experiences and smart digital marketing. Authentic's proven approach accelerates leasing velocity, boosts rental rates, and increases long-term value. You can find out more at AuthenticFF.com. And by Charles Gate, the multifamily investor's secret weapon to help underwrite, go to market, and operate projects that generate market-beating returns. With an adaptive staffing model and on-demand leasing teams, Charles Gate empowers a better resident experience at an efficient cost structure for today's owners. Visit charlesgate.com for more.
I agree with what you've said, Steven. Relationship-based community outreach, your outreach program, your partnership activities is really important. It's intentionally making the time to do that for sure. When it comes to signage, though, I always made it a point to not make it a huge part of my job as a marketing leader on the property side. We know signage works, and certainly you can have it as a source for how someone found out about you in your CRM system. There's flaws, personally, I think, with self-reported data like that. So there's always going to be a variance of truth there. But I wouldn't let it take up too much of my time. If you take the time ahead of time to create your strategic signage plan for any given property or certain asset class, so on and so forth, and have a vendor or another internal marketing designer who is implementing that signage strategy, then I think that signage can be what it is. It's really easy to let signage get carried away when it's outside the scope of marketing, whether it's your on-site team going to the local signage agency, and then signage just becomes litter across the community. Nobody wants to live in a place where there's just signage sprinkled throughout. So doing it intentionally, knowing that it does work, and having a plan for that ahead of time, and not allowing it, certainly if it's not your role, to let it eat up your time and mind share, to focus on other things that deserve more of your attention.
I'd add one last thing to that, Autumn, is you have to go to the property.
Yeah.
Like if you're a marketer and you've never been to a property that you were trying to create marketing content for, you are severely limiting your ability to actually think out of the box and come up with things that will actually work. That's outside of the standard cookie cutter that most people deploy.
Yep.
And just kind of wrap that all in a bow. I think for me, it always comes back to, is there a strategy for this property? And to Steve's like going there might be a key part of developing that strategy. But you've got a property near Tesla. Of course, that makes total sense. That is the outreach to that as a referral source is a critical piece of the strategy. If you got a property in the middle of nowhere in the woods, maybe signage isn't the best option. Maybe, again, there's a lot of, there's a million different ways of marketing tactics. And if you're trying to ask like give attribution to what's the best one, it's almost impossible to say without developing that strategy that's based on the unique property and the unique location and the unique audience for that property to begin with. So if you don't start with that strategic standpoint, who is your audience? How are we delivering it to them? What is the experience we're trying to generate? All of these factors that allow us to message and speak to those people in a powerful way you're otherwise it's just going to turn into spray and pray or any number of tactics that we see that you're spending money wildly that don't drive any results because you don't have any cohesive plan to implement in the first place.
I think the pin in that is there is no panacea, there is no silver bullet, right? Like it's going to be different for every property. Every property is a unique challenge. Even properties in the same submarket, if your access is different because one's on a one-way, access road and the other one's on a two-way street, that impacts your marketing. So you have to be aware of all these things, and again, be willing to change and experiment and try things.
Yeah, and by the way, just to layer on top of that, it jogs my memory saying yes. Even more so within the context of one submarket or one neighborhood, you need to find a way to differentiate your product, your messaging, and carve out your audience that is attracted to your property in the right way. That is what lets you, beat the market, not just be the market.
Absolutely. I think some of the attendees on this live can tell you, I love a good preferred employer program, but in not every submarket are you able to call it that or, activate one, especially when I was leasing and marketing in DC, source of income was a protected class. So instead of focusing on, really strategic partnerships from a workplace standpoint, piggybacking off of what Mike shared, we would really dig into the psychographics of the neighborhood rhythm and the people who live there. Why do they want to live there? There was, no shortage of luxury apartments in Washington, DC, but being able to really market to people's lifestyle aspirations and motivations, and still build those meaningful connections like Steven did with Tesla, I think is so important. So I am going to actually switch to spotlight layout so the audience can see our bright shining faces even better, and ask the next question to our panel. With many property teams operating on tight marketing budgets, depending on these costly line items like a premium ILS package, how would you suggest diversifying that budget to align with the modern renter journey today as we're discussing it? And how can you prevent or try to deter losing money from these costly campaigns that oftentimes could have low tracking opportunities?
Well, and it's not just low tracking opportunities. It's also some of these don't, some of these sites, and I'll do my best not to call anyone out by name, but they don't just send you people who are interested in your property. They send you like a whole bunch of other people who were interested in other properties. And, our teams have it's an incredibly distraction rich environment on site. And when you're drowning them in hundreds of leads of people that probably aren't actually really leads, that creates its own issues, right? Because you end up contacting the people that aren't necessarily the best leads and missing the ones that are. In terms of ILSs, I am an outspoken ILS hater. I do not like them. That being said, they do have their uses. There are places where they work. But if 7 properties in your market are on a platinum plan and you're trying to decide what to do, and it may not be the best place for you to go. And you have to start the process of weaning yourself off of these as soon as possible. Because what's going to happen, and I think it was 2 years ago, apartments.com, I didn't actually I said one, but anyway, apartments.com, raised the price on their bronze package by $600. And if you were using that, you just had to say, thank you, I will pay you $600 more. Please don't do it again because I can't afford it. And if you're not building this pipeline of social, of and going out there, and I would say, frankly, even AdWords, right, with search optimization is also extraordinarily expensive, right? Like that matured in 2010, right, roughly. So if you want to get ahead of it, this just goes back to that iterating and experimenting and doing things to where you don't have to be reliant on these single sources, especially on older assets, especially on smaller properties, where if you have a $2,000 a month marketing budget or less, which I've run a lot of properties with under a $2,000 marketing budget, you have to start getting creative. And the only way to do that effectively is to start. Otherwise, the market's just going to pass you by and you're going to get trapped where you can't do anything.
I think one of the things I first think about when it comes to this question, and I have very strong opinions on ILSs too, just like things that we all think and feel as marketers in multifamily, but a personal pain point of mine over the last almost decade being in the industry too, and what it's done to my budget and how to overcome that. But with going back to like the original premise of like why we're meeting is the renter's journey. I had a practice at my when I was on the operator side. We would literally take all of the art on the wall down in the office when we were in person, and we would go and we would put sticky notes and we would map our activities across the renter journey. And this would be like an annual activity that we would do. And it was so helpful to understand of like where your touch points, where your marketing touch points through the funnel or the journey, however you decide to visualize and map that, where your gaps were. Where you were maybe overemphasizing activities, pairing that with data at a different time to understand like what the mechanisms were that were driving that, whether it's too many dollars in that area, activity that wasn't converting. And then you can start to optimize that renter journey, but also making sure you're delivering the right message to the right audience at the right time and making sure that you exist throughout that renter journey pre-lease. And so that starts with some of the fundamentals, like going in really strong with your SEO, having a PPC presence at all times, not just when you have availability, knowing how that looks different between a stabilized and a lease-up asset, and then what those other touch points are and how you may need to augment that or supplement that with ILSs. And many companies still, I say, unfortunately, have to use ILSs today, especially small, medium-sized companies, because being able to like have that additional fork in the road to really start to get going with SEO and PPC to a place where you can start to pull down that lever on ILSs is a hard pivot to take if you don't have the resources to invest in it right now.
I would add one last thing to that, Autumn, and to kind of pull this back to something we were talking about earlier with the traditional marketing efforts, right? Those are things that only cost time, right? They don't cost money to go to these businesses and go to these places. So it's those things that can be part of building that pipeline and supplementing your traffic. Because I will say, and kind of egg on my face, I was consulting for a company a few years ago in Vegas, and I just killed apartments.com and it killed our traffic. That was really dumb. Like that was really dumb of me. And we had to kind of scramble to fix it. But so you can't just turn it off, but you have to start like giving yourself some options. And not everything costs money. Some things just cost effort.
Yeah, and I think and good points. And as much as we can talk about ILS taxes, the ILS tax, and all these other elements that are just adding a lot of cost burden to properties, to operators, I think that's true. And what Autumn said is like we do need to take this all in the context of the resident journey. And there's no one place that they saw about us. It might be that they needed to see 5 social ads. They might see a pay-per-click ad they don't click on. They might see they might see it on apartments.com and they end up on our website somehow because their friend referred them and told them about it. I mean, there's so many different sort of journey paths that are possible. So the critical piece for me is that I think recognizing who your audience actually is and what the messaging that needs to be created and relayed at every step, which is what Autumn just referred to, including through the leasing and after move-in, to make sure that you're taking advantage of a holistic brand feeling and essence and team and experience that this prospect and renter is going to have, that allows you to maximize whatever budget you do have. And again, if it's targeted around, if a property has an extremely micro budget and they can only do, pay-per-click ads, they can only just do apartments.com or any other of the ILSs or whatever, maybe that makes sense for them. But if you can really, even if you can only do that, you have to own the messaging and you have to own what you're actually going out there to market with to really drive impactful results within the context of any budget. And really that's the only way. If you do, because otherwise, if you have this, I don't care if it's pay-per-click, social, or apartments.com, if you're just out there saying luxury apartments for rent in XYZ city, it's the same as every other one that says the same goddamn thing. Excuse my language. If you're not differentiating, you're not marketing. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah. And I think some of the components to help a property get there, starting from ground zero with your brand, your value prop, and your messaging, and making sure that that is being relayed not only in one of your biggest assets, which is in your website, but making sure that that messaging is existing across your other touch points, whether it's in physical or in the digital realm, making sure that messaging can exist in your PPC ads, but bringing everything back to your home base, which is the website and your biggest source of conversion. And whenever I had websites on the property side, I saw that not even necessarily as just a marketing asset. That was our biggest leasing asset and pushed people through the journey to conversion. So being able to do that and acquire your first party data and have that for future use as well will just set you on a better path to optimizing your renter journey.
I think you both bring up a really good point also on the content side of things, right? Like it's not, so something I've been asking for a while from marketers that I haven't seen is this idea of pictures with words. Like if you think about like how Instagram or that sort of thing works, where you have big bold letters over something, well, you can change that word and reuse that picture in a bunch of different ways in a bunch of different places. And we do a real, Michael, Chris and I were on a thread, I think yesterday or day before on LinkedIn, commenting also about like, what are you actually selling? And within each tranche of product, everything has the same stuff. So what is driving renters' decisions? It's not that you have a fitness center because everyone has a fitness center. It's not because you have a pool because everyone has a pool, right? It's all personal taste. So you have to sell the things that resonate with personal taste. It's the color of the backsplash. It's the type of counter. It's those things that someone says and it has an emotional connection to and says, I would live here. And that's where you differentiate because no one else is going to have that same set of things in terms of personal taste. And that's ultimately what's going to drive more results than look at our fitness center that, the other 6 properties that are the same age and the same neighborhood all have. So you have to really, and that's not money thing necessarily. That's just a framing and what you're presenting to the market thing.
Absolutely. I also think when it comes to budget diversification, obviously ILSs are getting more expensive. It's important to consider a waterfall approach. A lot of these ILSs, you don't need to be a premium package holder for the entire duration of your lease up. And a lot of these ILS packages also offer other perks like Matterports and, updated video tours. And I think if you're really on a tight budget, as an owner investor, as a marketing accomplice to these people, you need to know when the notice dates are due, when you do need to turn the dial back and conserve spend. And you also need to know what you're getting from your vendors. Like, don't be afraid to ask your website provider, your social media management company, how are you tracking multi-touch attribution for the renter journey? And if there's one partner who seems like they've really got it right, then it might make sense to invest more in them. So just being really educated on what you're paying for and how you can use it to the natural rhythm of a lease up, where 90 days pre-CO is going to be where a lot of these move-in decisions start to get, really over the top. And, maybe 6 months out, it's a good idea to get that awareness prioritized. Just know the playing field. And I can't believe it, but we're already at the last question, and then we'll do audience Q&A. So last question, AI, everyone's talking about AI. As AI, digital and traditional marketing mediums converge, what's one key trend you anticipate impacting the renter journey in the coming years? And specifically, how can owners and developers and marketers be prepared for that cutting edge?
So I'll take this one first, I guess, as well, because I have a company that's really focused on AI right now. So a couple things, and what I hear from people, because I meet with a lot of people a lot, and really just show them how I'm using it, and that tends to be pretty eye-opening. So how I would not necessarily use it for apartment marketing, I wouldn't say write me a Facebook post, right, or something like that. Or I might, but I wouldn't just take its answer and like just write as it is and then use it again. Like most of these things are a partner for you to work with as opposed to a replacement. The other thing where I use it a lot is strategy. So when I'm trying to come up with ideas on ways to do things, its ability to help me ideate quickly and come up with 10, 25, 50, 100 different things that I can then sift through. And, if I sat there for an hour, I might come up with 70 of them, right? But I don't have to sit there for an hour. I can sit there for 3 minutes, right? And get all of this back and then and it's profoundly good at that, of even just saying like, hey, I have an apartment community. It's in this area. Here's the website. Here's its competitors. I'm struggling. How can I differentiate from my competitors? And if you give it the websites of those properties, like on ChatGPT with search, it will go look at those properties and come back and give you ideas and give you things that you may not have thought of otherwise. The other thing that I always tell people with AI is stop being scared of it and start using it. If it's not working well, it might be the AI, it might be you. But for me, like the most profound thing AI has done for me is it's reminded me how to learn, because I'm like 41, I'm kind of old now. I don't understand the words that people in their 20s say. It confuses me. And as a byproduct of that,
Steven, come on, don't lie to us.
Someone said Riz to me the other day. I had to Google it. It's like, what's that? But I remembered that when I was learning to do things when I was younger, I was really bad at them, right? Of course, because we've never done it before. Like the analogy I use for people a lot is tying your shoes. Like when you were really young, you had to have like rabbits that ran around trees and went into holes, and all of a sudden you had your shoes tied. But now you could do it blindfolded. All things work that way. It's all muscle memory. It's all your brain learning how these things work. So you have to start using them. And I promise you will be shocked that they are so much more powerful. Chris making me laugh. 41 is not old. It's not old. Look, I still got 60 years ahead of me, but my hairline would disagree with you a little bit. But it all comes back to, you just have to start using it. Just play around with it, and that you will start to discover things. And what really benefited me, in 2023, when I really started exploring these tools, was I thought I was the problem. Like anything I asked it to do that it couldn't do, I was like, well, that's my fault because I'm an idiot. So I need to it created this stubbornness where I just need to stick to it. And then I started to figure it out. And I think that's what a lot of people, as people become older or adults or whatever you want to call it, adults, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, you forget that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to have things not work, but you have to start using them, because this is absolutely going to be pervasive in everything that we do. It's not going away, right? Like toothpaste is out of the tube. So you have to start using these tools to figure out how to use them well.
Yeah, yes, use AI, decide where you need to use it. I think in investing in a broader AI strategy and its use cases for your business is going to have more significant efforts. So for a property management company, deciding where AI will be used and where it will not be used is really, really important. And having some sort of committee or even hiring an AI charge person to help drive that strategy forward is going to be important in the years to come. And if you're not doing that now, you're already behind. So that is like not even figure it out. Yes, use AI. I would caution where you're using it. Years ago, when it first started and there was this arms race to have AI chatbots and large language model chatbots on the website or through automatic email marketing and SMS, be very cautious of like where you're using AI, where humans still need to exist. And I think that that's going to be an anti-AI trend or an anti-AI component of how buyers do their research and how they shop. Is they're going to be increasingly attracted to companies where it's a people first and you're talking to a real human.
Absolutely. I was just commenting on Grady Newman's post last week of like, what is a luxury amenity to you? And my answer was when something goes wrong and a real person can talk to me about it. I think that is the ultimate luxury. I've definitely played the chatbot, like automated voicemail, like endless loop before, and it's so stressful. So I guess my AI like prediction or wish list item is AI powered search and Google. I don't know how many of you guys spend your time surfing the internet, but it's more common for AI powered results to be at the top of the SERP and even above sponsored content. And it's not uncommon for us to see like transforming cities and Charlesgate blogs in those responses. But what pains me, and this is my prediction / wish list item, is that there's no tracking in GA4 for like AI produced traffic. And I just know that people are probably getting these answers from these results, maybe clicking through, maybe not. Maybe that AI result is enough and they're not even, exploring these pages, but I would love to see the numbers and, be able to track that more meaningfully. I think in June, Google teased it out and they were like, AI as a source is coming, but it's almost February. I was just telling Autumn, it feels like it's been January for 6 months, but give me that feature. If anybody here is ex-Google or Google, put in a word for me. I'll get off my soapbox now. What do you think, Mike?
The only thing, look, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where this is going. It's obviously the to Steven's point, the technology is here. It's growing. It's not going anywhere. So we need to be leaning into and learning the pros, the cons, the benefits, how to use it. I think I do worry. Like I've seen other things where people and companies in the industry and others have tried to incorporate automation or other aspects in so fast that it tends to cause more problems than it solves for necessarily. So, I even could bring this back to the idea of revenue automation, which everyone knows I'm not a huge fan of, primarily not because the tech sucks. It's because people that are using it don't really know what they're doing. Right. And so that's the same principle here that I think is very, very important to recognize and understand. But at the same time, I think if you're doing it in the right way and incorporating and using it, it can be a very good tool and resource. And I think there's a lot to learn. I mean, look, I don't know. 2 years from now, is OpenAI's ChatGPT operator going to be renting everyone's apartment for them? That could be true. I don't know. But I do. I do. So it's hard. I think we've got to pay attention, stay ahead of it, learn, but use some critical thinking around how to incorporate this in the best manner that's feasible within context and constraints of the industry and the roles that you're in. But yeah, for sure, it's important to be kind of leading in terms of at least learning and starting to implement at this point to what you can is a great way to extend thinking, strategic thinking, as Steven said, or other aspects in many ways that are useful for sure.
I think an important thing for people to remember with any sort of technology or software is they're all tools. None of them are solutions, but those companies sell them as solutions and they say this thing will solve all of your problems, whether it's a leasing chatbot or revenue management or whatever it is. And the reality is that's not how tools work, right? If you give me a hammer, a chisel, and a block of marble, I'm going to give you a bunch of tiny blocks of marble. If you give that to Michelangelo several hundred years ago, you get David, right? Like, so we have to use it to support things and keep right. It's just not good enough yet to replace things. But technologists who don't really understand our industry tend to sell things as solutions. And I think that's where, as an industry, not just with marketing in general, we've run into some struggles where we have 1,000-point solutions and it's creating a bunch of challenges that we didn't necessarily have to have, where we've taken a complex job and made them incredibly complicated, right? The job is always going to be complex. We provide people with their homes. That's incredibly intimate. It's their castle. It is not like selling anything else in the world. And because of that, I believe we always are going to have that human touch. But because of some dynamics of the industry, and I could go on about this for hours, but people have been, and because management companies operate on small margins, we've been trying to squeeze all this down. But it's still tools and solutions. You have to put the tool in a skilled hand. And when you think it's a replacement, that's where people get themselves in a lot of trouble. We're still a little ways away from replacements, even with Operator. And I love Operator. I was playing around this weekend with building an agent where I could say, I'm looking for an apartment in this neighborhood, and it would go look at Google Maps and find for me, and then it would return units as opposed to properties, right? Because that's actually what I'm shopping for, is units, not properties. So that's coming, but we're not there yet. And in the meantime, you have to use it to be ahead. If you wait for the how-to book to be written, you are too late, and you will be passed by. You have to help write the book if you want to be successful.
Yeah, just to put one pin in, I think what both of you guys and Tori said is we need to, I think, always come back to what we're trying to do here is deliver great human experiences and places to live. And so that's such a critical human need that if we lose sight of that, just trying to drive more efficiency or save costs or implement new tools, whatever it is, it's very easy to lose sight of that and deliver a poor experience in whatever aspect of the resident journey there might be or living experience. And that's just going to cause property performance to decline, people to be unhappy, cause more problems than what you're trying to solve by driving more efficiency or automation through a process.
Yeah. Do you know how you can simplify the renter's journey? Have to lease less apartments because people renew.
Right.
Yes. Well, I can't believe that was the end of the roundtable dialogue. Now it's time for our Q&A with the chat. So if I see a few questions here, I'm going to start reading. But if you have questions that we didn't address or questions based on what we talked about, please feel free to drop them in the chat right now. Grady Newman wants to know, how do we actually use AI to support versus replace the leasing function?
Yeah, I mean, I'll dive into that. I think that's literally one of the things that I think AI is a great use for is helping to expedite communications. Again, if you're thinking about it, it's a great way to help to have a faster response, have a way to build in structure and support and some automation where, again, without taking sight of what you're trying to accomplish here, but I think it's a great opportunity to be able to have, a larger reach in terms of the communication, a faster reach in terms of the communication, if done in the right way. And so that's where I think there's a lot of benefits that can get unlocked, because one single human can only be so responsive, or even a team of humans can only be so responsive within a certain period of time. But if you set it up in the right way, I think there's a good opportunity to expedite and communicate better.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And then I'd add, like going back to that, like why people lease, right? One of my mentors told me that we sell time in a box. A day gone is a day gone forever. And then when you sell a day, you can only sell it once. So that's why rental rates are really important and all that sort of thing. What I've learned that I've added to that in my career is we sell time in a box by selling the lifestyle around the box. And that's somewhere where AI can really help, because with the turnover in our industry and the things where people are on site and they don't necessarily know all the things in the neighborhood and that sort of thing, having a interactive, like, what is there to do? And that doesn't, the other mistake that people make with this is they think it's all, well, that's only urban and mixed use projects. That's not true. Every property has a lifestyle, whether it's suburban, whether it's in the middle of the woods, like the property Michael was talking about earlier, right? Like whatever it is, it has a lifestyle. And it's really hard to move that through, right? To have that knowledge be transferred from person to person. Maybe you get lucky and have someone who lives at the property who's really active and does a lot of things, but AI can fill that gap really well. Like, what would it be like to live in this neighborhood? It can tell you, and it can give you a really good description. And the thing that I think we get into trouble with sometimes is we forget we want to lease to everybody. And that's not sales. Sales is people tell you no, right? Like, we want to find the people who want to live there and who that's going to resonate with, because they're more likely to renew. And so that's somewhere where I think it could really impact the leasing function, and something that could probably be built pretty easily and embedded into websites of, like, what's it like to live here? It's like Rent Grata's product except AI.
Love Rent Grata.
My favorite. If I could buy one, I'll give them a shout out.
Yes.
Maybe one day they'll sponsor me or something, but because I talk them up all the time. But if I could have one leasing tool above CRM, above everything else, it would be Rent Grata, because it's social proof.
Mm-hmm. They do a really good job. Another question coming in from Eric Briggs wants to know, let me turn my volume down if I'm echoing. What are your thoughts on policies promoting net effective rates on units with concessions to gain more traffic to the property? Do we feel this could cause a bad start to the relationship with the renter?
I've seen it both ways. I don't typically we don't advertise that way. That said, there are conversations where we may talk to a resident who would prefer to have it sort of kind of booked that way against their ledger. But I think generally, if you're advertising a lower price that is not really the price, so to speak, it's probably going to lead to more negative feelings than positive feelings as far as what we've seen out there in the marketplace. But there's an art and a science, some science, more art to incentives, I feel like these days, in terms of what's going to appeal to more people and how to position those incentives against what you're trying to deliver for rent. But I think ultimately it comes down to really who's the audience you're trying to target for that particular property. What's the messaging you're putting out there, and how does that incentive package actually fit within that context to strengthen the overall messaging and branding and experience of the property.
Go ahead, Autumn.
I was going to say, pricing is one thing that we haven't talked about, but is one of the major components of acquiring and converting traffic, of course, and alongside the whole 7 Ps of marketing. And oftentimes it's a lever that marketing doesn't or can't influence. And so we can have all the research in the world to say, look at our competitors, look at the competitor research that I've done, and our rental rates are in the top 5th percentile of rental rates. If we lower that across these competitors, we're going to get and convert more traffic. Obviously, I know there's drastic implications of what that looks like on performas and NOI over time, but that's an additional lever that marketing needs to have a seat at the table on with operations and your asset managers as well. I haven't ever seen net effective rate been promoting it in that way be effective, especially long term, depending on how long their lease is, 9, 12, 15 months. They're going to forget. And then when you raise the rent rate upon lease renewal, they're going to be more likely to move out because it's going to be such an increased variance between net effective rate and what they are increasing to. I'd just be conscious of what your actual rent rates are, along with the fees, and being transparent around your fees and the additional concessions and incentives, and not try to blur the line between that for a net effective rental rate.
Yeah, I think pricing is a lot, really kind of depends on your demographic and your market and who you're trying to reach. And it's another one of those things where you can experiment and figure out what works. We actually, ironically, it was that same property I mentioned with Tesla. We took it over coming out of lease up. It had 60 something, it was 320 units. It had 60 something move outs scheduled for November. That was not going to be fun. We also had other lease ups open at the time that were all running multiple weeks free, and we were trying to match their weeks free. It didn't work. Well, so we just dropped the rent, right? As we play games with ourselves sometimes with these net effective rents or recurring concessions, and what someone pays is their rent, period, right? And sometimes, and ultimately, that unless some of that comes back to owners' goals, are they planning on exiting soon, right? Is there something where they need that top line revenue to be a certain number for a certain reason? Or sometimes if your property next door is 4 weeks free, and I'm not gonna make myself do math right now, but say they're at 1,200 and we're at 1,200, we're also 4 weeks free, but I drop that to 1,100, right? And just kill the concession. No concession is $1,100, right? That can a lot of times generate more traffic and get more people in the door because people go to the website and they see the sticker price, right? Net, that's the same amount of revenue being generated for that property. And the only metric that actually matters as a property manager is net operating income. Everything else is a vanity metric. So they're all, so that's, it's again, another one of those things I think you experiment with.
Absolutely. I think, there's a lot to be said about giving somebody net effective rent to get them in the door, but I am a firm believer that price transparency builds that trust. And, if you're advertising an apartment based on a 1 month free concession and you're leaving out the parking, the utility, the, Valley trash fees, like all these added ons. The concession's actually not saving them that much each month. And they won't know that until they're halfway through signing the lease and they're like, hey, what the heck? Like, this is not what we talked about. And that can really sour a relationship with a prospect. So I think price transparency is great. I think if we're looking for an example, I leased from a UDR property once, and they did a really good job in their e-leasing of like telling you what the special is, what the rent is for the duration of the lease, and they averaged like the amount of fees for utilities for that floor plan based on their data. And I thought it was just like really transparent, and I liked it a lot. So that is my spiel. We have time for probably one or two more questions. This looks like a really good one from Jason. The hotel industry has brands like Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, Viceroy, and you have a general idea of what to expect. Same with the Holiday Inn. Do you see true brands at the same point in multifamily lifestyle versus just individual property attributes?
Number one missed opportunity by multifamily right now. Number one missed opportunity. When our product got commoditized by the internet, anything that becomes a commodity, you compete on one of two places: price or brand. And we don't compete on brand as an industry. And then those who do try to compete on brand compete on silly things like resident services, when the thing that you should really be competing on brand on is maintenance. Like, if you could say, we have a 48-hour maintenance guarantee, and if we don't fix it, I'm going to pay you money every time. Even if I pay money sometimes, right? That's okay, because I would actually market that. I would say, we paid this much money to residents this year or this quarter for not getting things done, because that builds confidence in the market for those people to come back. It is the number one opportunity, and it's why you're starting to see some hospitality brands and that sort of thing. And it doesn't just have to be the big companies. It can be a regional company, it can be a local company, right? It doesn't have to be a big thing to build brand, but I think brand is the number one opportunity, and I think people are scared of it because of maintenance. You fix maintenance, that becomes your brand.
I think it's just variable. The company and the types of assets and ownership of that property management company and what the makeup is, the density in certain markets or sub-markets, what the long-term hold strategy is on those assets. What I see from this question here is like brand experience versus brand. And brand experience is all about like what you can expect and then trust. And we see a lot of that happening in property management companies where it makes sense. And oftentimes, depending on what the brand architecture is between the parent company or the property management company and the individual properties, is those properties are going to start carrying attributes of that parent brand, because there's a lot of brand equity that can be developed there. And then in passing, develop that equity, that trust back in at the property level. There's a lot of things that you can do in the marketing realm, but it's all about the service and the experience, and making that people know what they're going to get when they interact with your brand, whether that's through a prospect or a renter experience.
Answer Grady's question about, does Four Seasons brand their maintenance? I would say yes, just not directly, right? That's the experience. You show up and it's clean, and there's that expectation of service that you're going to get. And the underlying thing in that, a part of that is maintenance, right? Like, that's part of that experience. I don't expect to walk into a room at the Four Seasons and see a leak on the ceiling, right? Like, all those things would have been checked. So brand's one of those tricky things that it takes time. But if you look at the hotel industry and hospitality, their management agreements are typically 10+ year flags that convey with sale, because the brand is worth more than me starting Steven's Hotel, right? So that this is not something that could be generated or manifested instantly, but like a lot of the things we've talked about, you have to start doing them to be able to build yourself up to that. And so yeah, that's my last little rant on brand.
And we could go on for that. Maybe this is a whole other roundtable, I think, actually, because I think there are pros and cons to that approach in some ways, right? Depending on some aspects that Autumn mentioned. I don't want to get into. I know we're running up against the end of time, but I think there are some key differences to consider for that question, and what's the right approach for any given property, or depending on size and many other factors. But even just operationally, Steven, I get the point where you're saying maintenance is a huge driver, but there is also a difference operating a hotel where you can, take down 2 rooms for 2 weeks. It's not a major issue. You don't have to have people living in them and also doing repairs at the same time. So there's there's more complexity with multifamily housing operations than hospitality hotel operations that I think play factor too.
Agreed. But you add a 0 to a company's valuation when you can do those 10-year flags. So it would be, I think it'd be worth, someone will figure it out, right? And it may not be everyone, but someone will figure it out. And just like with hotels, right?
Well, I know we're at time. I do have one more really good question that I know Mike is going to have thoughts on, and then we will hop off. Josh wants to know, does the traditional 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. business hours model meet customer journeys needs, or should multifamily have extended hours? Is being open on the weekends integral to the success, or does a Monday through Friday work?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense to have someone, leasing associates, sit in the office all day when no one shows up and leave before people want to see them. No, it makes no sense whatsoever. I don't think just offering extended hours makes sense either, though. What you do it on demand. You do it around the needs and the hours of the people who and when they want to tour and see places. So rather than having someone sit at the office all day and do nothing, or sort of be an assistant manager while they're there and go pick up some papers on the floor, and then not do showings and have a virtual, showing bot that does it after hours, half-assed, you totally rethink it. So we've centralized our leasing operations, and we do showings and tours by appointment. It's simple as that. And we can meet people where they are on weekends, after hours, mornings, whatever work, because we compensate our leasing team as salespeople as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into that and how we operate our on-demand leasing system. But yeah, 100%, it does not make sense to just say leasing office open 9 to 5 or whatever. That doesn't work. I don't think for anyone, the leasing team, the property management team, or the prospective renters.
I think on the resident side, because that is also impacted by these hours, that there's something to be said for consistency. Because I've seen some people say they vary it based on occupancy and that sort of thing. I've always been a big fan of staggered schedules, a couple of days a week. So maybe you have someone come in at 10 and work till 7, or come in at 11 and work till 8. When you have actual traffic or people wanting to come, or you schedule resident a resident event that they can host at the same time or something like that, to where you're not just having someone sit there and do nothing. But I do think consistency in making a decision and sticking to whatever it is important, because the thing that really drives residents nuts is walking up to an office and expecting someone to be there and it being closed because it's a Saturday and you were open Saturday most of the time, and all of a sudden you're not.
Yeah, but to be clear, when I was saying that, carving out specifically the leasing function, not necessarily the resident services or management. And the way we operate is with a separation of those functions, and because they're 2 different jobs. And so, again, long story, totally time for another conversation around that. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, Steven. But specifically regarding leasing, treating it as a sales function, doing it on demand to meet the needs of prospects is the critical way to outperform the market,
especially on smaller assets.
Well, all right. I think we very well could have gone 30 hours instead of 30 minutes, because there's just so much good conversation happening. I encourage everyone attending and all of the panelists to keep the conversation going. Autumn, Steven, and Michael, and I, and Chris are all on LinkedIn, and we're very responsive. And, this is a topic we're really passionate about. It's not going anywhere. And I just appreciate so much everybody who took time today to come to our first roundtable. So thank you. Any final thoughts, panelists?
Thank you for putting this together, Tori. Appreciate it. It was fun. So thank you.
Stop.
Super organized. Not the way I do things. I'm more from the hip.
Well, thanks. Well, more to come.
Yes, thank you, Steve and Autumn. Great to chat with you guys. Victoria, awesome as always. And hopefully we have another one of these soon on Transforming Cities.
I think we have to at this point. Well, great. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.